I was on some, this old nonsensical box that went in at the moment might seem wonderful or marvellous to you. It's not all that marvellous to me. I mean, I don't consider that I'm at Mass or something when I'm on this thing.
At what?
I don't consider that I'm at Mass or something like that when I'm on this thing. After all, it's only it passes the time for somebody.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, if I had me way, I wouldn't be looking at myself on this.
But that
if I was somebody but myself and I had the offer to look at myself or go for a walk around the block, or perhaps down to the corner, you know what that means. I'd probably go down and walk down to the corner.
Well, it seems to me that you've gone down to the corner once too often. And to put it mildly, Brendan, you don't appear at your best on television when you've got 1 over the 8. Does this not make you feel embarrassed?
I'm embarrassed being there at all. I'm embarrassed now and I haven't won over the 8. I haven't even won over the 7.
Do you believe in God? Are you afraid of death? Are you afraid of libel suits? How do you think this rather parochial book of yours will sell in London? Why did you set your new book in Dorky?
Well, mainly because I think it's a very pretty, nice, compact little town. I liked it. I lived there once.
Why did you leave it?
Well, my landlady came to the end of her patience.
Towards the end, he was drinking far too much. And it had all sorts of difficulties. There were people who come in here and he'd be rude to them, and then there'd be complaints coming back, you know. And a senior officer being rude to customers is not part of the ethos of the Irish Civil Service by any manner of means. He might have been able to ride that one out if he hadn't also been writing. And it was the writing really that brought the chopper down on him in the end, because he was hurting a number of people by what he was writing, and he was making enemies in that respect.
One night he came in and he said, "I've been sacked," or something to that effect. And I said, "Don't be silly," because he'd say things like that, you know. And I said, "Oh, don't be silly," or something like that. So he said, "Ask somebody else." It meant somebody else in his department. And I got some kind of an answer like, "Well, he has left," or "he wanted to leave," or something to that effect. So that was that. And I said, "Are you mad?" You know, he had a very high salary. "Oh, well," he says, "I'll have a pension." And you see, that was it. He wouldn't have to do this routine. Now, he didn't say that to me, but that was obvious. That wasn't his kind of life. Well, I don't know whether he thought all that out, but that's the way it came out in the end, that we were living on what he wrote. He gave up the civil service, which was madness in a sense, but then he wasn't an ordinary civil servant. So that's the only way I can describe that. I mean, you couldn't describe him as the come day, go day, every day, 9 to 5 or whatever the time was. He didn't do that.
Brian O'Nolan was now a professional writer, free to be Flann O'Brien or Miles Nagopoline on a full-time basis. Indeed, he had to be, for the state had allowed him a pension of less than £300 a year. Even in those days, not enough for a respectable, married, suburban householder with an expensive fondness for whiskey. The trouble about being only Miles Nagopoline, though, was that the Irish Times paid its most famous contributor a paltry 2 guineas a column. Of course, he could always write novels, or could he? It takes a good deal of sheer physical stamina to write a book, and even apart from his drinking, he was not in good health. Besides this, there was the strain of the column, and since he couldn't live on that, he used up his talent by writing allegedly humorous pieces for whatever journal would take them. His confidence in his novel-writing abilities had been considerably shaken by the rejection of his second novel, The Third Policeman. This would be hailed after his death as a masterpiece, but the typescript had been gathering dust on a shelf for years now. Where books were concerned, he was inclined to talk them out in advance. He spent many months telling people about St. Augustine and the part he would play in the Dalkey archive.
Something I read, I don't know where it was, suggested that there was another side to this great man. And being disoccupied one afternoon in town, I went into the National Library and looked up certain books, and I found he was had been one of the most debauched, the most atrociously, I don't know what the word is, the most sinful, the greatest transgressors of any commandments, animal or spiritual or human.
A sort of Miles Nagopoline of the early church.
Oh, no, I had no jokes about it. He was an absolute disgrace to the human race. That has been carefully kept away, of course.
Well, he certainly redeemed all that many years afterwards.
Yes, in other words, he had his cake and ate it.
But sometimes you got an incredibly long, involved article, quoting everything from Aquinas to Chesterton and everything else, proving how nasty bunch we were and how we were sitting on his intellectual life and, you know, how we were unseen censors and Protestant this and... Although I wasn't a Protestant, neither was he. And most of the Irish Times weren't. But Miles, at a certain stage, would use this phrase, we were a bunch of Protestant bastards sitting on his mortal soul. You learn to put up with it. But there'd be long unaccountable absences, which were never really explained. But sometimes you'd get a very long and involved letter enclosing a medical certificate from some doctor friend of his. On one occasion, he claimed to have broken his leg. On another occasion, he hadn't been in for a fortnight. And what he told us was he'd been reading manuscripts for an English publishing firm and that he was not drinking. And because of this, he'd bought an enormous bottle of orange juice and had gone to bed with the manuscript. And that he kept drinking this. That he hadn't read the instructions that you're supposed to mix it with water. So he drank a gallon of this stuff, Kior or something of the kind, neat, and naturally got citrus poisoning and was vomiting violently for days.
On a Raglan road, on an autumn day, I met her first and knew that her dark hair could weave a snare that I might one day rue. I saw the danger, yet I walked upon the enchanted way. And I said, let grief be a fallen leaf at the dawning of the day.
In 1954, Patrick Kavanagh was misguided enough to sue when an obscure weekly journal published a nasty profile of him. One of the most astonishing things about the action was the amount of space it got in the Irish newspapers. He was 3 days in the witness box. Presumably to show what bad company he kept, he was asked if he knew Brendan Behan. His denials were passionate. The following day, the defendants produced a book inscribed, "To my friend Brendan, on the day he painted my flat." It was perhaps the only amicable day's converse they ever had, but the jury were not to know that. From now on, Kavanagh was the defendant. In the aftermath of the trial, he was seriously ill. When he came out of hospital, he spent many of the days of a beautiful summer lying on the banks of the Grand Canal. And it was there that what he described as a rebirth took place.
Lazing there by the cool waters, I was, as I've said before, reborn, born for the first time.
Oh, commemorate me where there is water, canal water preferably, so stilly, greeny at the heart of summer. Brother, commemorate me thus beautifully, where by a loch Niagarously roars the falls for those who sit in the tremendous silence of mid-July. No one will speak in prose who finds his way to these Parnassian islands. A swan goes by, head low with many apologies. Fantastic light looks through the eyes of bridges. And look, a barge comes bringing from Athy and other far-flung towns mythologies. Oh, commemorate me with no hero courageous tomb, just a Canal Bank seat for the passer-by. Of them all, Kavanagh was perhaps the freest spirit. The sort of laughter which seldom fails those who truly possess it was his innermost resource. And in the end, he won through to a new freedom in his work as well as in his life.
What would you like to have said about you in 50 years' time?
That I'd celebrated my 87th birthday.
Well, if you don't take the doctor's advice, you might never celebrate it. Do you fear death, or don't you care?
I do care. I don't like it. I don't like to die in lack at all. I don't think anyone does. I can give you instances of very eminent men that surrounded themselves with all kind of quacks and all sorts of doctors and surgeons and coppers and scientists in an attempt to stop in this world just a little bit longer. The fella said we know where we are. We're not quite sure where we're going.
Well, none of us is quite sure where we're going, but wherever you go...
You're quite sure you're not going to die. Anyone that appears on television so often as you is under the opinion that they're going to live to be about 150, and then you'll have one of these things over you to get your last minutes.
Brendan Behan's death is the triumph over the irrepressible by the irreplaceable. He was, in fact, much more a player than a playwright. And to use a Dublin saying, he was as good as a play. A delightful rowdy, a wit, a man of action in many dangerous undertakings where he thought his duty lay, a reckless drinker, a fearsome denouncer of humbug and pretense. How does Dublin take his tragic departure? I know it is only foolishness in my own head, but the streets seem strangely silent.
I've a giant intellect.
And as I say,
not yet expressed, but about to be expressed in a wonderful book. The stuff I've published heretofore is just trash.
And so an era came to an end. I do not for one moment believe that it will be the last era when figures whose importance is only partly, if at all, recognised walk the streets of Dublin. We might even be living through one now.
'Tis 50 long years since I saw the moon beaming on brave manly forums and eyes with hope gleaming. I see them again through all my daydreaming. Glory oh to the bold Fenian men. Eche rod y tarach yn ar eirig an caslio, ac dan bas beisyn an teidr o ddawan fiach yn anchoel, ac bo fiach eliob an bos, agus eile in yn asiwn. Glory oh to the bold Fenian men. Well, I think that was done fairly well considered.